The protagonist by the name of Hong Dan-woo nervously entered a spacious barbershop, greeted by the administrator who asked about his appointment. Unsure of himself, he considered leaving but was encouraged to sit in the chair. Despite his nerves, he took a seat, realizing there was no turning back. Earlier, while washing dishes at a cafe, he reflected on his appearance. His employer highlighted the importance of neatness, showing him photos that demonstrated how his look could affect their reputation. Shocked by the feedback, Dan-woo learned he could earn a bonus for improving his appearance, motivating him to make a change. Determined to keep his job, he searched online for grooming ideas and recognized the need for a haircut. Although he initially thought growing his hair out would be easier, he realized a visit to the barbershop was necessary. Observing others getting haircuts heightened his anxiety, but he tried to reassure himself that it was time to face his fears. Dan-woo quickly grabbed his phone, seeking an inconspicuous salon with few people around. He found a nearby barbershop with minimal reviews, suggesting it was newly opened. After some searching, he located the shop, noting its small sign. Feeling nervous, he took a moment to calm down. The hairdresser interrupted his thoughts, asking how he wanted his hair cut. Regaining his composure, the young man requested a neat and tidy style. The hairdresser checked in on him, and although he confirmed he was fine, Hong Dan-woo realized that being alone only heightened his anxiety. As he looked at the hairdresser, he noticed the man's handsome appearance. The hairdresser began cutting and tried to lighten the mood by joking about Dan-woo's long hair. Hong Dan-woo explained that his boss wanted him to tidy up his look. However, when the hairdresser touched his head, the young man flinched in surprise. Covered with a cape, Hong Dan-woo trembled and quietly apologized for his nervousness. The hairdresser responded sharply, asking him to bear with it for a moment. Sitting up straight, the young man realized he just had to endure the situation. Noticing his discomfort, the hairdresser adjusted him gently and encouraged him to relax his shoulders. He instructed Hong Dan-woo to straighten up by pressing on his neck and tilting his head down. Using a spray bottle, the hairdresser began to wet the young man's hair and initiated a conversation, noting that he hadn't made an appointment and didn't even know his name. Hong Dan-woo quietly shared his name, prompting the hairdresser to jokingly comment that it sounded like a carrot. He then guessed that Hong Dan-woo had come in after work and mentioned that his own workday was also finished. Hong Dan-woo grew even more anxious and began apologizing again. The hairdresser reassured him, expressing curiosity about working with him, but requested that he make an appointment next time. Flinching at each touch, the young man quietly agreed. As his nerves reached a breaking point, he gripped the cape tightly. Noticing his discomfort, the hairdresser encouraged him to speak up if he felt uneasy. Despite trying to assure the man that everything was fine, Hong Dan-woo was acutely aware of his anxiety and discomfort. He considered getting up but felt trapped until the haircut was complete. Sensitive to touch, he struggled to remain still and wanted the experience to end quickly. The hairdresser warned him that continued twitching could lead to accidental injury, prompting Hong Dan-woo to sit still and refrain from moving. The hairdresser worked in silence, eager to finish the haircut. He announced that it was complete and only needed to dry Hong Dan-woo's hair, but the young man was ready to leave immediately. Ignoring his words, the hairdresser began drying his hair. Once finished, he removed the cape and revealed the new hairstyle. Overwhelmed with nervousness, tears filled Hong Dan-woo's eyes. The hairdresser leaned in, asking if he liked the new look. To his surprise, the young man found it suited him perfectly. However, he noticed his trembling knees and tensed up to hide his anxiety. Quickly apologizing, he rushed out of the barbershop, leaving the hairdresser confused. After a moment, the professional chuckled to himself, realizing the young man was likely exhausted from work. As the hairdresser wrapped up his shift late at night, Hong Dan-woo hurried home, quickly ascending the stairs to his apartment. He entered his password as fast as he could to get inside. Hong Dan-woo swiftly opened the door to his apartment and collapsed on the floor, trying to catch his breath. Embarrassed by the earlier incident at the barbershop, he felt as if he could still sense the hairdresser's touch. The next day, he returned to work and greeted a familiar woman, who immediately noticed his haircut. Feeling awkward about the attention, he was surprised when she apologized for pointing it out, acknowledging it was beneficial for the restaurant. Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by another employee who playfully pounced on Hong Dan-woo, startling the woman. This colleague began teasingly touching his hair, joking that he had arrived to work earlier than Hong Dan-woo. Moments later, he looked at his friend in surprise. Hong Dan-woo asked to be released from the playful teasing and requested it not happen again. At that moment, another guy approached, unaware of the situation. Mistaking Hong Dan-woo for his friend, the stranger quickly apologized and stepped back. Dan-woo hurried to his workstation, while the stranger asked if everything was okay. Tangled in his sweater, the young man remained silent, eager to focus on his work. The stranger was left puzzled by the lack of response. As lunchtime approached, the restaurant filled with visitors, creating a lively atmosphere. Seeking a moment of peace, Hong Dan-woo stepped outside and sat on a bench. He appreciated the crowd, thinking it would help him avoid running into Woo Ri. While enjoying his meal, he suddenly realized it must have been awkward for the stranger to mistake him for a friend amidst so many people. The man approached Hong Dan-woo, took an interest in his milkshake, and sat down beside him. He apologized for the earlier misunderstanding, explaining that from behind, Dan-woo resembled his friend. Curiously, he asked why Dan-woo had decided to get a haircut, assuming it was due to the heat. Dan-woo explained that his boss had requested he tidy up, which surprised the other employee. The man remarked that such a request seemed excessive, then turned back to Dan-woo and chuckled amiably. Noticing their friendly exchange, Dan-woo decided to introduce himself, but he already knew the man's name, Woo Ri. Puzzled, Woo Ri asked how Dan-woo knew him, to which he awkwardly replied that he was quite popular and well-known. Woo Ri then mentioned that he also recognized the name of Dan-woo's partner, attributing it to his keen hearing and curiosity. Woo Ri expressed interest in Hong Dan-woo's age, surprised to learn he was only 23, which made him younger. He asked if he could call Dan-woo by his name, eagerly stating he would appreciate it if Dan-woo did the same. Reflecting on their conversation, Dan-woo realized it was their first real interaction despite having worked together for a long time. As Dan-woo walked down the street, he felt a sense of camaraderie, but soon his mood shifted as he approached the barbershop where he had just gotten his haircut. He understood he needed to go inside to pay and return the cape, fearing they might report him for theft. Peeking through the door, he quietly asked if anyone was there. The shop was empty, with no one at the reception desk. His eyes were drawn to his belongings, neatly folded on the counter. Deciding the coast was clear, he quickly reached for his things, hoping to leave without incident. Suddenly startled, Hong Dan-woo lifted his bag and quietly announced that he had come to pay and return the items. However, something strange in the room made him freeze. He decided it was best to grab his belongings and leave quickly. Just then, the barber's voice reminded him about the cape, heightening his anxiety as he debated whether to explain himself. A stranger hurried past him, quickly putting on a mask and staring intently at Dan-woo. Surprised, Dan-woo remained silent, but as the man exited the barbershop, he realized the stranger looked familiar. The barber approached, telling Dan-woo he had come just in time. Confused, Dan-woo listened as the barber explained that the situation involved a stalker, not just an acquaintance. Hearing this made Dan-woo extremely anxious. He felt it was dangerous and thought it would be better to call the police. The barber just laughed at Dan-woo's concern. Crossing his arms, he remarked that he had more reasons to smile lately. Dan-woo felt himself blush again, remembering that he hadn't paid for his haircut, had left his wallet and clothes, and only returned the cape. He assured the barber that he would pay immediately if he could retrieve his belongings. Placing the money on the table, he lowered his head, mentally grateful that the barber seemed unaware of the previous day's awkwardness. The barber's thoughts shifted as Dan-woo nervously touched his hair. Remembering Dan-woo's comments about how quickly his hair grew, the barber noted its unruly state. Dan-woo blushed again, flustered by the attention. Then the barber suggested he might need to cut Dan-woo's hair shorter. He recalled how nervous Dan-woo had been the previous day, explaining that he had rushed to finish the haircut because of it. This made Dan-woo take a few steps back, unsure how to respond to the unexpected revelation. Dan-woo appeared calm as he smiled kindly, reassuring the barber that he had nothing to worry about. The barber then reached for a drawer and handed him a business card, suggesting that if Dan-woo wanted another haircut in the future, he should call to make an appointment. The barber smiled warmly, saying he would be waiting for Dan-woo's call. Feeling frightened and unable to control his reactions, Dan-woo decided he would never return to the barbershop again. At work, he quickly washed the dishes, his mind still racing from the encounter at the barbershop. He couldn't shake the unsettling feeling and wondered what was truly wrong with the barber. As the evening approached, the service staff finished their tasks. Dan Wu's workplace looked immaculate as he carefully picked up the trash, recalling that they were shooting a new drama, set to air on Fridays and Saturdays. Bae Yun-woo, the star making headlines, was set to play the lead role in the new teenage drama, and everyone was eager to see how the idol would perform. Suddenly, Hong Dan-woo realized he had seen Bae Yun-woo in the coffee shop before, and recognition filled him with amazement. As he stared at the celebrity, he failed to notice another employee approaching him. This worker quickly apologized, panicking to keep his white apron clean from the trash. Moments later, he gaped at the dishwasher in disbelief, unable to process what he was seeing. Dan Wu instinctively covered his face with his hands. Wu Ri then intervened, confused about the situation. He observed Dan Wu closely, sensing a connection between him and the new employee. Dan Wu was surprised that Wu Ri, whom he had only recently started talking to, was standing up for him. Meanwhile, the flustered employee began to fumble and justify himself, insisting he hadn't meant any harm. Wu Ri pointed out that the young employee had chewing gum stuck in his hair, causing everyone to panic as they tried to figure out what to do. Wu Ri immediately offered to help, insisting he would remove it. Dan Wu stepped aside, determined to handle the situation himself, but soon realized his attempts were futile. The gum was too sticky. When he tried to pull his hand away, he found it was sticking to his hair as well. He looked fearfully at the other employees who wanted to assist, but quickly left the restaurant, unsure of how to help. Declaring he would manage the problem on his own, Dan Wu recalled how his colleague had been worried about him and considered telling them he would handle it at home. He also thought about finding a new barbershop, but was reminded of the police being called last time due to his panic over getting his hair cut. Overwhelmed, he covered his face with his hands, unsure of what to do next. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more awesome content. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Check out these other great videos you might enjoy.